In this video, we are going to be discussing gifted and talented education students. A lot of these things are going to apply to those high achieving students, but the focus is on gifted and talented. First, I want to start off with 8 great gripes of gifted students. The first one, no one explains what being gifted is all about. It's kept a big secret. A lot of gifted students don't understand why they go to these special classes or what it means to be gifted. They just know that they have to. A lot of gifted teachers are trying to start teaching students about those things, but classroom teachers can also help students understand why they are gifted or what it means to be gifted. School is too easy and boring. A lot of teachers don't differentiate for these students and they get bored real quick. Parents, teachers, and even friends expect us to be perfect all the time. It's a lot of pressure to put on a kid and they feel it. They get nervous about making a mistake on the whiteboard in front of all of their peers, and it hurts. It's hard for them. Friends who really understand us are few and far between. Gifted kids are kind of unique, a little bit weird sometimes. They are really smart. And so when you combine all that together, sometimes they have a hard time making friends because that friend can't keep up intellectually, or their weirdness just doesn't mesh together right. Kids often tease us about being smart. Last year, I had a second grade gifted student come to school and say, "Mrs. Landberg, what's teacher's pet?" Well, that tells me that somebody was calling her a teacher's pet, probably in a negative way. And that's how she had to find out what it is. So I explained to her what teacher's pet was and that sometimes kids might say it to be mean, but I encouraged her to turn it around and tell the student, "Thank you. That means the teacher notices that I am doing what I am supposed to be doing." We feel overwhelmed by the number of things we can do in life. Gifted kids are good at a lot of things, and it's hard for them to narrow down their focus from all of these things to just a couple of things. It also results in parents enrolling their kids in everything, all the extracurricular activities, music, instruments, stuff like that, to where they are so overscheduled that it's overwhelming. We as educators need to remind parents to let the kids have something, one or two things to have the lessons and stuff in, and then let the other things just be for fun. We feel different and alienated. And the last one, we worry about world problems and feel helpless to do anything about them. Gifted kids, whenever they feel things deep in their soul. And so when they hear something like world hunger, they want to solve it, but they don't really know how or have the tools. So creating opportunities for these kids within the community to have community service projects or do things in a small way really goes far in helping them overcome those anxieties about solving world problems. Now we have the 8 great gripes of gifted parents. My kid isn't challenged in school. Teachers and other adults just don't understand my kid. Help. It's hard dealing with gifted intensity and behavior at home. These kids they say things and they do things that you just wouldn't expect. And sometimes parents have a hard time with that. We're going to talk about intensities a little bit here in a minute. So many awkward social situations between my kid and other kids, and me and other parents. Sometimes gifted kids say things that you just wouldn't believe come out of their mouth, and there's typically not a filter with it. It's kind of raw or rough around the edges, and that makes social situations awkward at times. Asynchronous development. My kid is 8 going on 30. We're going to talk about what asynchronous development is here in a minute. What's the remedy? My child has perfectionism. There's not a one size fit all remedy. You just have to try different things and encourage them and remind them that they don't have to be perfect, that it's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are proof that you're learning, things like that. Does twice exceptional mean twice the challenge? We're going to talk more about twice exceptional, but twice exceptional means a student is gifted and has an IEP. The school day is so inefficient for my kids. A lot of parents feel like their day their kids' day at school is just a waste of time because they're not getting anything for them because they already know all the stuff. Both of these things came from published authors that have conducted lots of research. And as a gifted teacher, I will say I see all of these things and hear all of these things from my students and my parents. First, let's talk about asynchronous development. Asynchronous development is where a kid can go and have an academic conversation with a doctorate in a specialized field, and like they're two adults having a conversation. But then 10 minutes later, that same child can be fighting with a peer over a Barbie doll or a Hot Wheels car. There are so many things that are just not in alignment. So it's important to remember that these are still children and they sometimes carry themselves like an adult or can have those adult conversations, but they still have those needs of belonging and peer interaction and things like that of a similar aged child that they would have. No two gifted kids are exactly the same, they are each different. Many of you may have seen a diagram similar to this circle one with the triangles on the screen with autistic kids. It is the same for gifted kids. They have certain ones have strengths and weaknesses, but they're all going to be a little different. I will tell you a lot of them struggle with social emotional things and not understanding how to have interactions. Also, a lot of them struggle with those executive functioning skills. I met a student in college that had been gifted, what is gifted, and they told me they know a lot of things about a lot of stuff, but they struggle to take notes, be organized, have time management, um, study skills, things like that. Everyone had always assumed that this kid knew how to do all those things and could do all those things, but nobody ever actually took the time to teach this kid how to do those things. And when they got to college and they had to do them, it was a real big struggle because they didn't know how. We're going to look at some of the positive and negative characteristics of gifted children. For the most part, I'm going to let you read these things on your own. I am going to put them on Blackboard in our resources about gifted education students so you have them. But I do want to tell you that just because you hear of gifted kids doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows. They all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. They all have strengths that can kind of come out as a negative way for their weaknesses. Something right here to point out with the inquiry is it's okay for teachers to not know everything, and it's okay for gifted kids to not know everything. It's important that teachers do make mistakes in front of the kids, and it's important that kids can catch teachers making those mistakes. But don't try to brush it over or be like, or try to tell them it's correct. Let it be wrong. Mistakes are how people learn. And kids need to be able to see that everyone makes those mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And if they bring it up in a rude way, it's a great opportunity to teach them how to point out that a teacher is wrong in a respectful way. So here's some more traits and things about students. They have intense interests. Sometimes those interests last for a couple of weeks, sometimes they last for a couple of years. It's hard to get them to move on to something else when they're so interested in it. You see this a lot with our readers. They don't want to put their books down, which can cause a problem because you might have to move on to something else. When it comes to leadership, please don't always make your gifted students be the helper for your classroom or the miniature teacher. It's not fair to them. It's not providing them with a learning opportunity and letting them get better at what they are or need. And so they shouldn't be the teachers all the time. It's okay every now and then, but eventually they're going to hate it and resent you for it. Right here, students, it's important to give gifted students a chance to voice their opinion. They have so many opinions and they have so much knowledge in their head. One easy way to do that is when you're finished with the lesson, just ask them what went well with this unit or what could have been improved. They will give you great feedback, which will help you be a better reflective educator and possibly be able to change your lesson for the following school year to improve upon it. Um, so a lot of times gifted students, with the way that they process information is going to look different than other students. Some of them they might have ADHD too and they've got to shut their brain down or just focus. Other times they're trying to make connections within things. If a gifted student is looks like they are lost in thought or daydreaming or puts their head down for a minute, don't automatically assume that they're being rude or they're not being paying attention. They may just be trying to process information in a different way that you're not used to, and that's okay. They need to be able to have that safe space to process information the best way that works for them. A lot of them have weird humor. They make jokes. Some of them try to be the class clown. Some of them are very, very immature, even though they're super intelligent. Some myths about gifted students. A lot of people assume that gifted students are good at everything they do, they get good grades, they don't need help. A lot of people assume that they're the easy kids. That's not always true. Are some of them easy? Do some of them get good grades and not need much help? Yeah, but it's not for all of them. Gifted students learn things faster than other kids. And so you might be able to teach something 1 to 3 times, and that kid can master it after one practice. Whereas the other kids in your classroom need you to teach that same thing 7 to 10 times, and they need to practice it another 10 to 15 times to fully grasp how to do something. So they don't come to your classroom knowing everything. It's just that they learn quicker. They pick up information and make those connections in their brain faster than other kids do. Um, English language learners cannot be gifted. That's not true. There doesn't matter what language a child speaks, they have the capability of being gifted. If your district has the manpower, you can ask them to give um, a gifted test in the child's native language. But a lot of times, the school psychologists that administer those tests can't speak the child's language. But there should be a nonverbal type of IQ test that they could be given to be able to help identify them. To give you an example, if a school district has 48% of their population as Spanish speaking or Hispanic, then the gifted population should be around 30 to 48% as well. But many times, what we're seeing is that these subgroups are very underrepresented in gifted education programs. And so it's our jobs as classroom teachers to make sure that we're looking for those kids that learn things really fast or think about things in a different way or are picking up English super quickly. That those are good indicators that that kid might be gifted. Gifted students are happy and well adjusted at school. That's not always true. Gifted kids carry around a lot of pressure, stress, anxiety. Many years ago, there were a lot of studies that said that gifted education students were more likely to commit suicide than any other subgroup in a school system. That data is pretty skewed now. It's changed a lot, especially after COVID. They've seen an increase in student suicides and things, but there is still a lot of correlation that gifted kids are not happy at school because they feel so pressured. I had a principal tell me that gifted students are either going to change the world or they're going to end up living under a bridge. And that's because they carry so much with them. And when they come to a challenge that they are not used to getting, a lot of them just shut down and they end up not being able to overcome any type of life thing. They can't hold jobs, they can't finish school, things like that. So it's really important for classroom teachers, gifted teachers to advocate for gifted students to make sure that they are getting the things they need to be successful. The last myth is gifted students cannot have an IEP. Gifted students can have an IEP and be gifted, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. In Missouri, we have something called the Missouri Gifted Learner Outcomes. These are standards just like we have the Missouri Learning Standards, but they are specific for gifted students. They are based around these 6 core areas. When a student goes to gifted education class, the teacher is going to be teaching things targeted to these things. The things that the students are learning are going to be more advanced. That might be academic coursework that is a grade or 2 grades above where the student's grade level is. Sometimes it's social emotional learning type things or critical thinking. Um, Sometimes it might be teaching them those executive functioning skills or how to communicate. Other times it's going to be fulfilling their need to help the community or the world. Either way, I feel like it's important for you to know that when a gifted education student goes to those classrooms, they are doing things that they need for them. Don't give them a bunch of homework so that way when they come back from gifted education class, they have all of this extra work to do. That's almost like making gifted class as a punishment, and it should never be a punishment. Gifted education services are required by law in Missouri. It is similar to receiving a service, like if a student has an IEP in reading. When they go to their special education teacher to get that extra instruction in reading, they don't come to back to your class and you give them a bunch of extra homework in reading because they were gone with their special education teacher. So you shouldn't be giving them a bunch of extra work when they leave and go to their gifted education class because they're getting that specialized instruction that's needed for them. It's almost like they should be exempt from the work from that day. Now, if you have a project that has an end date and it's somewhere in there, if it's due on that date, it's due on that date. Maybe give them the next day to turn it in, but don't add extra things to them because they are getting things they need in that class. According to Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, this is the recommendation for how gifted students are identified and become part of the gifted education services. DESE recommends that all of students in a school district are universally screened to see if they have any of those characteristics. You will see tests called COGAT, NNAT, NGAT. Those are universal screeners. They are group administered tests, and you can use the data for further evaluation. From that, 10 to 20% of the population should be moving on to that next level. And those students, you are going to look at them individually and see if they have any of those characteristics, because no matter what the test, there's going to be a few that pop through for that probably shouldn't be there. From those, after they're looked at each individually, about the top 10% is going to be given an IQ test. And the IQ test in Missouri, the recommendation is students should have an IQ of 125 or higher to be in a gifted and talented education program. All of the districts in Southwest Missouri have different requirements for that. Carthage requires a 127 right now. Webb City requires a 125. So districts can kind of make some of those own decisions, but this is what DESE recommends. From that, about the top 5% of students in a grade level should be placed in gifted and talented education programs. And those are the students that are going to receive services. However, students with an IQ of 120 or higher are considered gifted students. So, what that means is you are going to have students who are gifted in your classroom that don't receive gifted education services. And it's your job as a teacher to differentiate for those students to make sure their needs are still being met, even if they're not going to gifted class. And gifted class is not an end all of be all. They still need things in your classroom. So in Missouri, there's 3 types of delivery models or ways that students receive gifted services. The first one is the resource room teacher. This is usually happening in elementary classrooms where students are pulled out of class to go to gifted class and receive instruction on academic and social emotional things that they need there. These students are required by law to receive 2.5 hours a week or 150 minutes a week of gifted and talented education instruction. When you have students in your classroom, you should not be scheduling field trips, extra parties, assemblies, things like that during the gifted and talented time, because you're causing the gifted kid to have to choose between receiving this service that they really need or going to something fun, and that's again punishing them. The next delivery model is the one that we see most often in a junior high or middle school setting. It's the special class teacher. And this is where a lot of times students have to choose gifted class as an elective. And they go to that teacher only during that time, but they work on their gifted and talented education standards. I highly encourage schools not to use this as an elective credit, because a lot of gifted students are also very interested in band and choir and art and things like that. So when they get to the junior high level, a lot of them try to drop out of gifted services because they want to explore those other things that they're interested in. So if your district has a seminar or a homeroom class, that's a great option. Or you can also have them in like a gifted ELA class where the classwork is accelerated for those students. And the last model is in high schools only, and it's a gifted resource teacher. There is a gifted certified teacher that is available to students at any time for email, but then they are also in the building for at least 150 minutes a week to provide help with those students. They can monitor their grades, they can help them write um, college applications or essays, fill out resumes, go on college visits, things like that. A lot of the gifted students will utilize dual credit and college classes in high school. And so that gifted teacher is there just to kind of help them and check in on them and be available when they need them. There are programs for students who are exceptionally gifted, and they are called PEGs. These are for students that have an IQ of about 140 or higher. They go to class every day, Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. It's probably about the top 1% of an entire school district. So, in a district the size of Carthage, you have probably 5 kids that have an IQ of 140 or higher. Carthage has around 4,800 students, I believe. And when you get to larger school districts like Springfield, Kansas City, St. Louis, they have schools dedicated to these students. In Southwest Missouri, the closest one to here is in Springfield. There are students that have an IEP and are gifted. If a child has dyslexia, ADHD, autism, anything like that, it sometimes will mask their giftedness and make it harder to identify them, but they sometimes it might balance them out, and then other times their giftedness masks their disability, where it's harder to identify that they have a disability because they are using their giftedness. It's kind of like they're using one area to compensate for the other, and it's called masking. They're hard to find, they're hard to identify. But yeah, they're out there. And I will tell you, there's a lot of students who have autism that are also gifted. And you may not realize they have autism, but they do, just that it's being masked because of their giftedness. A lot of teachers, when they have gifted kids in their room, they use those kids to help other students or help a friend or things like that. Or they have a anchor chart or something in their classroom that says, "I'm done, now what?" And the answer is always read a book, do extra work, play games, free time, do homework from other classes. But that is not challenging our gifted learners or even our high achievers. Some other options for that, first of all, when you're teaching, integrating higher order questioning into your lesson plans is a great way. I will include this higher order questioning stems in there. Even as a new teacher, it's important to practice asking deeper questions of your students. So if you just leave this on your desk when you're teaching, and if you have a minute or two, ask those questions. The gifted kids might get them. Even if the gifted kids don't, it's going to get students thinking. And your lower level students, it's good for them to hear these questions and these answers as well. So making sure that you're having a good variety of questionings in your lessons, but also focusing on getting some of those DOK 3 and 4 questions in there is really going to be beneficial. I loved this quote by Todd Kettler. He said, "Gifted education used Bloom's taxonomy to emphasize higher order thinking skills before it was common practice. Enrichment through depth and complexity and differentiation strategies began as gifted education practices before wider adoption into general education at the end of the 20th century." What this is saying is gifted students originally were challenged by having higher level thinking questions. Because they saw so much success with it, now that it's kind of been mainstreamed, where you want to always have good higher level thinking questions in all of your lessons because it benefits all students. Some other ways to differentiate for gifted students is by providing pretest. If you always pretest, if you have students that ace that test at the beginning, don't make them sit there and go through all of your lessons. Allow them to do something else that's going to engage their brain. Some of those things that you might be able to do is you could have an activity menu or choice menu. This is where you can either have certain you can do like a 9 square thing, and you can make them do a tic-tac-toe or 3 in a row, crisscross, blackout, whatever you choose, but it has activities on there. They can be activities geared towards going deeper with the content that you're going to be teaching, or they can be activities that are just going to be of interest to the students. Another thing, authentic learning. Anytime you can incorporate real world situations into lessons, it's going to engage those gifted students better, and they're going to want to participate. Using flexible grouping, it's not always the best practice to mix up and put low level learners with high level learners. Sometimes you need to put all of those high level learners together to give them the opportunity to challenge each other. But you can also pair them by their interest or their learning styles, things like that. Giving students the option for passion projects or genius hour. If they've already mastered the content in that pretest, sit down for 5 minutes with them, not even 5 minutes, 2 minutes, ask them what things they're interested in and tell them, okay, go research that, put together a presentation, and when we're done with this unit, I'll give you 5 minutes and you can present this to our class. They can make a variety of different ways to present this. You can make a choice board for them to determine how they want to present that information. We already talked about higher order questioning and the importance of it. You can have them do project based learning or problem based learning. Again, those encourage real world, they promote critical thinking. It challenges those kids and gives them time to really work on things. Academic acceleration. If a student already has all the information, they can skip a grade level, they can advance in one subject area. It is a Missouri law that students have to be provided academic acceleration if they have already mastered the content in the class. Those pre-tests are going to help with that. And the last one is curriculum compacting. We see this a lot in the gifted ELA classes where if they've mastered all of the ELA content, you teach it in a shorter amount of time. You don't spend all that time doing the repetition, but because students are getting it, you can move on quickly to the next thing or to other things. That's all for gifted and talented education. There are many other ways out there to differentiate for gifted students, but these 9 things are the core things that are going to prepare you as you are going into your first classroom. Please keep in mind it's just as important to differentiate for high level learners as it is for low level learners. And if you create those assessments with those gifted learners in mind, it's so much easier to scaffold down and scaffold down again than trying to start in the middle and scaffold up and scaffold down. That's all I've got for you tonight.